We've seen a lot of religious apologists around here fail, but this time I take a look at a video by S.J. Thomason and find out that she fails more than most. Why does she fail? How badly does she fail? I kind of think you'll be shocked. I spend a lot of time around here going after the big name apologists like William Lane Craig and Frank Turek, but also the nobodies that you've never heard about, the crazy people on YouTube spouting nonsense about their imaginary friend. But I don't really spend as much time as I should on a lot of the mid-level apologists, people who aren't just ranting fevered religious dreams, but they aren't out there talking to massive crowds either. So this time, I wanted to take a look at a video by S.J. Thomason, who I've talked about once before, to learn why she fails just as badly as both the big and the small religious apologists. Because it doesn't matter what level you're at, you still have no evidence or good reason to think that this God thing of yours is real. So let's go have a look.
Hello, you've reached S.J. Thomason with Christian-apologist.com.
Seriously, and I think I pointed this out before, but why does that sound like your answering machine message? This is not voicemail.
Today I'm going to present to you why atheist deconversion stories fail.
I'm not sure how that could even be possible, because atheist deconversion stories, just like religious conversion stories, are not meant to say anything except to relate how an event came to pass. Success or failure isn't even possible, unless they mean that they failed to finish telling the story in the first place. What do you mean, fail?
To persuade people, one should use the tools Aristotle suggested of ethos, establish credibility, pathos, appeal to people's emotions, and logos, apply logic.
Yet, that's not the purpose of telling a story. It isn't to convince anyone, it's to tell a story. The relating of the tale is the point of doing it. If I tell my deconversion story, as I've done many times, there is no ulterior motive to it. I'm not trying to push anyone to also deconvert or to try to justify my deconversion. It just explains why I am no longer religious. There's nothing else to take away from it. So I think her first failure, the first of many, is that she has no idea what stories are. If I tell a story about how I went to Disneyland, that's not an attempt to convince anyone else to go to Disneyland. Come on, SJ, this isn't that hard.
I have encountered many atheists who have applied Aristotle's formulations to construct their deconversion from Christianity stories.
You don't construct an event that happened to you. These things are not made up. These are things that actually happened. There are no sinister motives outside of, hey, this is how it happened for me. Methinks the religious paranoia that everyone is out to get them is peeking out just a wee bit.
The intention of this video is to deconstruct their stories based on a higher level of the same three formulations.
There's nothing to deconstruct. It's a tale of something that happened to someone. It isn't some grand conspiracy. Everyone isn't out to get you. If you think they are, you've got some mental problems and you need to seek professional help.
Just as we have witnessed in some sitcoms and news broadcasts, most of the atheist deconversion stories I have heard are rather predictable. They begin with the atheist claiming to have been a devout, sometimes fundamentalist Christian, in an attempt to establish credibility with Christians, appealing to ethos.
So now anyone who disagrees with you is a liar. I guess we can similarly reject all stories of Christians who say they used to be atheists, right? Because surely that could never happen. But the fact is, most atheists used to be religious. In a world where the majority of people profess some kind of religious faith, by a pretty wide margin in fact, statistically, they pretty much had to be. In fact, if they weren't, then there's nothing that they could have deconverted from. Or didn't you think about that? Yeah, I didn't think so. So she doesn't understand what she's saying, which is hardly a surprise.
They follow with a tale of the pain they've unfairly endured based on a horrific event in their lives.
Not so. In fact, the vast majority of ex-theists never had any unhappy events happen in their lives. Now, I can point to tons of online YouTube atheists who tell their stories, and they were perfectly happy as theists. I know I never had any bad experiences as a Christian. I was never molested by the clergy. I didn't get abused. I wasn't unhappy. I just realized that the things that I believed weren't true, and I cared more about reality than faith. Now, you don't have to like that, but you do have to pretend to have some kind of credibility. And that's another failure. She's pushing a narrative that simply is not true. She's cherry-picking stories that fit into her narrative, overlooking the majority of stories that do not.
This event is often tragic and worthy of much empathy, especially when it involves a death in the family.
I'm not going to say that there aren't atheists that leave religion for emotional reasons. There are. I'm not particularly impressed with those because they left the faith for the same reason they got into it: mindless emotion and feels over reals. Okay, that's what happened to them, but that's not why I think people ought to reject religion. I think they ought to become atheists because religion is not rationally justifiable through logic, reason, and evidence. People should not believe things for which there is no objectively defensible evidence to do so. Again, she's cherry-picking.
Through this event, they call on our emotions, pathos. Then they state that God did not answer their prayers, calling on the logic of those who believe God has not answered their prayers either.
You know, the same thing that a lot of religious people do in their own conversion stories. They were depressed, everything was going wrong, they called out to God, and suddenly things got better, therefore God. Okay, sure, whatever you say. But those conversion stories aren't all that worthwhile either, especially if they're trying to make them into apologetic tales intended to convert others. And of course, that's what she's trying to do for atheist deconversion stories, whether they're used for that or not. I wish I could give her points for consistency, but she criticizes atheists for emotional stories, yet ignores Christians who do the same thing.
Logos. A second approach using logos is to claim they studied the Bible and 1. The stories of Yahweh in the Old Testament turn them off. 2. The claims about the Messiah cannot be true since they violate our natural laws. And 3. The claims from atheists or agnostics like Richard Carrier, Bart Ehrman, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, and Matt Dillahunty seem reasonable.
Of course, I certainly don't do that, and neither do most educated atheists I know. Now, I can't speak for all atheists certainly, but most of the people you see online engaging in anti-apologetics, that's not what they say at all. They have studied the Bible. They don't just take someone else's word for it like the religious tend to. They have done the work themselves and come to their conclusions on their own. They don't just say it. It happens to be the case. You don't have to agree, but then you'd be liable to come up with your own explanation for why it isn't and present your own evidence for why your beliefs are valid. And I don't think that's going to go very well for you. In fact, I bet you're going to just go with what Frank Turek, William Lane Craig, Lee Strobel, J.P. Moreland, John Lennox, Hugh Ross, or a whole host of other well-known apologists have said. The religious tend to be very bad at doing their own work.
Atheists use Aristotle's logic to justify themselves, not only to us, but to our Lord.
Hardly. We don't believe your Lord is real. Why would we care about justifying ourselves to your imaginary friend? And this represents yet another failure. She doesn't have the ability to step back and look at things from outside her own very narrow religious perspective. More than likely, she's one of those theists who think that all atheists really believe in her imaginary friends. She just thinks that they want to sin or something stupid like that. And that's utterly idiotic.
Like the emperor with no clothes, some of them march proudly among their peers in a cloud of pride and ignorance.
No, that's your side. By and large, we have reason and logic and evidence on our side, with no blind faith required. You're the one proclaiming absolute certainty that your imaginary father figure in the sky is real because the idea makes you feel good to think so. We just point out that you've got no reason to think that, and until you can present objective evidence to support your claims, we're not going to take you seriously.
Yet the Lord sees through them for who they are. He knows the hearts of all in humanity and can easily distinguish the unintentional from the intentional deceivers, just as a farmer could distinguish the wheat from the weeds.
And you know this how? Not believe, know. Because here's yet another failure, and we're racking up a huge list of them by now, but she seems to think that she can speak for and explain the viewpoint of her fictional father figure, which she can't actually show how she came to this supposed knowledge in the first place. It's really kind of absurd.
The parables of the lost sheep, prodigal son, and tares well explain these distinctions. Romans 1 further explicates that we are all hardwired with the knowledge of our supreme Creator.
Yep, that's just what I thought. But seriously, if I said somewhere in the Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, it says that everybody knows that the FSM is real, and honestly it could be there, I've never looked, but if it said that, would that somehow convince Christians that the Flying Spaghetti Monster is real? No? Well, why the hell do you think that we take your stupid book seriously? Anyone can claim that everyone knows X. That doesn't make it so, and only a complete moron would take such a claim seriously.
How should Christians respond to these deconversion stories? We should offer our own conversion testimonies. The most powerful way that we have to share the good news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ is through our testimony of how we determine the good news to be the truth.
Yeah, and how do you do that? Because, as I've shown in the past, these ridiculous conversion stories do nothing at all of the sort. Because where deconversion stories will tell real-world tales and explain why the atheist no longer takes the religious claims seriously, they're not magical, supernatural tales that cannot be independently verified or justified. They don't make irrational claims. Religious stories do. Or they show that the theist has severe mental problems. I mean, the story of Francis Collins, where he went into the woods, saw a waterfall frozen in 3 parts, and somehow that convinced him that God was real, that's not a rational conclusion to come to, yet that's pretty much how the religious operate. Something they can't immediately explain happens, they leap to a wholly unsupported conclusion, and Bob's your uncle. Because there's obviously no other more logical explanation for a frozen waterfall, right?
I was born and raised in a Catholic family, but most in my family left the church in my 20s. I floundered about for 2 decades, bouncing from denomination to denomination, and occasionally studying up on the Eastern faiths.
Okay, so you were indoctrinated into something that you had no good reason to adopt except for emotion. You wanted to have religion in your life, so you went searching for a religion that you liked, instead of asking yourself the most rational question, are any of these religions or denominations actually true? Do they have evidence for the claims that they make? Or do they just make you feel good? So you're already proving that you've got rational issues. Okay, go ahead. Please continue.
Then I had a very dark spiritual experience that sent chills up my spine and made me realize that God is active, loving, merciful, and powerful.
And how did you come to that conclusion? Because you're saying something bad happened, and it really doesn't matter what it was, just that something bad happened, therefore God is real. How did you get from one to the other? You don't explain. I suspect you have no answer because you simply leapt from the mystery or the bad experience to a belief in the God that you were raised to believe in. That's not rational.
He is both within this universe, immanent, and external to it, transcendent.
Again, where is your evidence for any of that? I don't care what you want to believe. I care what you can prove is objectively true with evidence. And no, stories in an ancient book of mythology don't count.
My son asked to go to church, and we entered a Baptist church just outside of my neighborhood, where I felt overcome by the power of the Holy Spirit.
You felt overcome. Emotionally. You simply leapt to the unsupported conclusion that the Holy Spirit had anything to do with it. Again, not rational. The religious have massive problems with that.
My life transformed, and I was baptized for a second time. I started ambitiously seeking knowledge of the Lord. Around that time, I found myself sitting next to a pastor on a plane who convinced me to read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity and Great Divorce.
So, you got conned into reading more unsupported apologetics aimed at emotional comfort and not objective evidence. This is exactly why people fall for con men. It's why people let scam artists from India log into their computers because they claim they're from Microsoft. It's why the Nigerian scam still works, because people operate on emotion, not intellect. And for some reason, SJ is proud of this. I can't imagine why.
The books greatly inspired me, setting me on an upward trajectory towards the way, the truth, and the life. After many years of only having a tiny New Testament and Psalms and Proverbs in my home, I purchased several versions of the Bible for my family. We are all closer to God now, and life has become worth living.
So, because you're now emotionally invested in this religious scam, you are filling your house with this garbage, deluding your children, and trying to sell the scam to others. You know, this is exactly how MLMs operate. They get people at the bottom to sell their illegitimate products while all the profits go up the ladder. And guess what, SJ? You got taken.
As C.S. Lewis said, I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else.
C.S. Lewis also said, I see you are an idiot, whatever else you may be. I take that one to heart.
Atheists who call on ethos, pathos, and logos to present their cases only see the naturalistic explanations for the events surrounding them.
But we don't call on any of those things to present our arguments. I have never seen an atheist use their deconversion story as a means to prove that atheism is true, if that has any meaning whatsoever. At best, a deconversion story just shows that it's possible to get away from the mind poison that is religion. It doesn't actually prove anything about the failures of religion in and of itself. It isn't a marketing tool, or at the very least it shouldn't be. But she says in this very video that religious conversion stories ought to be told specifically to lead other people to Christ. They're not just a story, they're a racket, designed to convince people to do what the storyteller did. My deconversion story has never been told to convince anyone of anything. It's an explanation why I no longer believe in the tenets of Christianity. It's to explain my exit from irrational religiosity. Atheists, by and large, in my experience at least, are honest. Apparently, the same cannot be said for the religious.
They fail to see the other half of the world, that which goes beyond this world.
The parts that you can only pretend exist and can't actually prove, right? Because that seems to be the case for every single theist, regardless of religion that I encounter. They are convinced, for emotional reasons, that their beliefs have to be true because they bring them such joy, such comfort, yet they never stop to ask themselves how they know that the things that they believe are actually so. It simply doesn't matter to these people. They get the dopamine hit, and that's all they care about. But people in all religions get that. People in all cults get that. People who go into MLM scams get that. That's how scam artists get people hooked. Believe what we tell you, and don't ask questions. It's no surprise that religion follows that exact same formula.
They fail to see that which inspires and calls on us to love, forgive, and give thanks. Accordingly, their stories only appeal to our natural experience and fail to appeal to our spiritual sense.
Because you can't prove that you have a spiritual sense. You want it to be true, so you insist that it is true, but you certainly can't prove any of it. If you look at religions around the world, they all make the same claim, a claim that your religion denies for everyone but yourselves. Why is that? They are as convinced that their imaginary friends are real as you are that yours is. Yet you arbitrarily reject theirs, because you're not emotionally connected to their faith like you are to your own. And you're so deluded that you can't see what you're actually doing. Seriously, what's wrong with you?
They therefore are not credible, ethos, logical, logos, or explanatory of our emotional connection to the Lord, pathos.
Things that you can't show are actually real. What she's really saying here is that anyone who doesn't take your delusions as seriously as she does must be wrong because feelings. But only her feelings count. The people who buy into essential oil scams, who are convinced that all of these things cure all diseases, even though they don't really do a damn thing, those people are every bit as fanatical as you are. Their delusions just run into different things. But you refuse to open your eyes and see you're no different than they are.
In this way, they fail miserably.
No, that would be you. We're just pointing out how irrational and delusional you are. Why no one ought to take any of your crazy claims seriously. And you're standing there like a petulant child holding your breath, going, I'm right, so there. You know, you need to grow up.
Within each of us lies a moral compass that is not explained by our evolution or natural world. The kingdom of heaven is within us.
Except it is. Evolution explains it just fine. We know morality springs from enlightened self-interest, but the religious want to pretend that their own religion explains it all, and that all other religions, the ones that say exactly the same thing, are wrong and only they are right. Well, funny, everybody else says that too. You're all just absurdly irrational.
2 Corinthians 4:8 says, So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal.
Yeah, sure. Read us some more wisdom from that big book of mythology of yours. Like maybe 1 Corinthians 14:34, women should remain silent in the churches, they are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. You don't listen to that one, do you?
Thank you for your time. I hope you'll like and subscribe and come again. Bye-bye.
Since you currently have 94 downvotes and only 7 upvotes as I write this, yeah, I think not. Sorry, SJ, but you're a joke, just like the rest of your religious brethren. You fail miserably every time you open your mouth. You know nothing about atheism, nothing about logic or reason or critical thinking. You don't know how to construct a rational argument, nor how to follow evidence to a conclusion while leaving your emotions and wishful thinking at home. You don't, and neither does anyone else on your side. It's why people laugh at you. I don't call you stupid because I enjoy it. I do it because you are. I'd hope that you'd see it and realize that you need to change, but instead, you people wear it like a badge of honor. You couldn't care less if your religious beliefs make you look like morons. They give you comfort, therefore you're going to believe no matter how absurd you look doing it. And that's not something that you ought to be proud of. It's something that you should be ashamed of. You ought to be able to set your feelings aside and look at the claims being made by the religion that you follow. Truth has nothing to fear from the facts. But the religious have no facts, and where their beliefs come into conflict with reality, they want to pretend that reality is wrong because their blind faith cannot possibly be. And I'm sorry, but that's not how things actually work. So no, SJ, atheism doesn't fail. It points out the absurdity of the garbage that you stuff into your head. You fail, and more people are realizing just how badly the religious are failing, which is why religion in the first world is dying, because people are getting too smart to buy into it. Maybe, just maybe, you ought to realize that you're on the wrong side of reality, no matter how good it might make you feel. Feelings don't change the facts. Reality doesn't bow to your emotional state. You're just making yourself look dumb. And I'm sorry if you're proud of that. I really am.
bum, 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 bum.